Hello, everybody. I want to do a video about arguments just to kind of supplement what you're reading in class, and maybe if you're in my face to face class, and to supplement my in class lecture. If you're in any of my online classes, then this will obviously supplement just the readings and so on. And then anything else you do, and I encourage you to look and explore. But as always, whatever you explore, whether it's online or in print or listening to someone, you have to be able to discern whether those people are giving you good information or not. But that's part of what this class is about. So, all right, let's go on. So, what is an argument? So, I usually start off and I'll tell students that, an argument, I'll ask, raise your hand if you know what an argument is. People raise their hand and they'll give me different sorts of definitions. And so what we're going to say, and what comes from this ultimately is from a colloquial standpoint. Colloquial meaning something like everyday usage, sort of normal usage. Just colloquial means kind of what you would see on an everyday basis, what you would hear on an everyday basis. So our colloquial language versus our academic language, or specifically our colloquial language versus our philosophical language, right? So that's what we mean by colloquial. So colloquially speaking, um, the term argument, when you ask people, and like I do in class, um, will give the following sorts of answers and replies. They'll say an argument is something like a this is one of the more popular ones, a heated debate or a heated exchange. People will say an exchange of ideas or opinions. Um, People will say things like an argument is an attempt to persuade. What else? Some people will just flat out say an argument is a type of fight, and so on. And you can imagine. I mean, this is, when I do this in class and I got 30 people in front of me, 100 people in front of me, sometimes I gather a large list. But this gives you an idea, and this probably, undoubtedly, um, represents what you most likely think about what an argument is. To which I say, philosophically speaking, in a colloquial sense, this is fine. Even I, to a degree, will use the word argument to represent, something like a heated exchange, like two people were having an argument, meaning that their opinions on something probably clashed and they were yelling at each other or something like that, some kind of fighting. So even I will do that from time to time. It's our ordinary use of the language of the word argument. In fact, if you look up argument, just do, what is an argument in Google, um, I came up with uh, uh, the following. Uh, I came up with the following. The following just kind of, these were some of the first ones that showed up. I thought they were sort of good examples of what you would normally hear. So look at this. This is literaryterms.net/argument. It says, what is an argument? A work of persuasion used to convince other people to agree with or claim or with your claim or viewpoint when they have doubts or disagree. We sometimes think of arguments as hostile and bitter, though they don't need to be the way, which suggests that sometimes they are. A good argument can, in fact, be calm, reasonable, and fair-minded. And then they give some examples. When you apply for a job, you usually submit a cover letter. A good cover letter is like a very subtle argument, persuading the reader that you're the right person for the job. Here's another example. You can't go to the concert, but while all my friends are going, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? And so on. And, you can sort of read this. Here's another example of literary devices in argument. So this is literarydevices.net/argument. Here it says, most people think of an argument as a disagreement between two parties. Its definition as a literary device is different. In academic writing, an argument usually presents the writer's position on a particular issue. Now, this is an academic class, and philosophy is an academic subject, and so it would seem that they would be talking about us. And but notice what he says: usually represents a writer's position on a particular issue, often in the form of a thesis statement or claim to be supported with subsequent reasoning and evidence. In literary writing, an argument is a brief summary of a work that precedes a chapter, book, or canto. And then, of course, you can go down and it gives all sorts of examples. Now, this comes the closest. And so this is the actual part of the definition. This is a type of qualifier, like where you might find an argument. This doesn't have anything to do with the definition. This is the definition that they give us. This is close to what we're going to mean to an argument. But my point here is that when you look at both of these, you get examples and definitions that in philosophy and in more of the sort of hardcore academic professions and disciplines, you get definitions and examples that don't actually tell us what an argument is. And so if we go back here, then we can easily say, let me change my color. We can easily say that for our purposes, this is not going to count as an argument. And that means what we read on those websites isn't going to count as an argument. That's not what we mean. Okay, so then what do we mean? Well, let's go ahead and try to give you a definition. An argument is a series, if I could spell, a series of premises which attempt to support the truth of other sentences Okay, so this is a very, very, I had the wrong inflection on my voice there, sorry. So this is a very, very general definition. I'm going to be a little bit more clear here in a little bit. So what we have then, and what this sets up for us is, let's use a different color here. What this sets up, I think, is a relationship. And I'm going to define some of these terms here. Again, I'm being very, very sort of general here. It sets up a relationship between something and something else, other sentences. So there seems to be a relationship here between one thing and I'll do this and another thing, right? In a particular sort of way, in a way that one thing is supported by another thing. And so we could sort of draw this out schematically here. We could say something like, here's one thing supported by another thing. Just if we just take how it's written here, what it's actually going to end up being is we're going to end up saying, so let me redraw this, is we're going to end up saying one thing is supported by another thing, which is the relationship that we are looking for. So this is just kind of misleading in the way, but it's just a habit of our language. There's nothing you're going to really do about it. That's why you have to learn this stuff, I suppose. But something, right, is supported by another thing. Now, we're going to go ahead and call the thing that is supported a conclusion. And as we know from our sentence here, the thing that does the supporting is a premise, or plural is premises. And so here's a way of looking at this very, very basic sentence and how to look at it in terms of a scheme where you have something, and this thing, if true, supports the truth of something else. So we'll label this argument. Let me redraw this here. Let's do this. Let's label this. Let's call this definition 1 argument. So that's our first attempt at trying to define what an argument is. An argument is a series of premises which attempt to support the truth of other sentences. And then we can draw it out like this. But now that we understand a little bit more what this relationship is between sentences, let's have a little bit more clear definition of an argument. So definition 2, argument, let's let that be the following. An argument is a connected series of sentences called premises whose truth attempt to support the truth of other sentences called conclusions. So now that we understand from definition 1 here and drawing it out sort of schematically like that, we can come to have, apologies for my cough, we can come to have a much stronger, more complete, robust definition of what an argument is that fully captures that relationship that we saw. So now then, if we're going to draw this out schematically, then what this might look like is a connected series of sentences. So meaning that the sentences have to have some relationship to each other. I'll do this over here. And so I'll just use an argument that has three premises. I'm just going to leave it blank for now. So one premise, two premise, three premise. And we're going to use this as our conclusory line, which establishes the link between the premises and the conclusion. And so, which attempt to support a connected series of sentences. So the idea here is that one, all these premises somehow relate to each other. They're somehow related. It's going to depend on what the argument is, what the subject is. There's no general way to capture that necessarily. But they're going to have to be related somehow. And we're gonna, and this definition tells us also that the truth of the premises themselves is also related to the conclusion. I'm going to be a little bit more clear about that here in a little bit. Such that, and I'll put 3 over here, such that if the premises were true, then the conclusion would either be necessarily true or would be likely to be true. I'm gonna explain that here in just a second. So then what 3 tells us here is essentially if this is true, comma, then this is or is likely to be true. Let me just be grammatically correct here. Oh, no, I mean, or is likely to be, comma, true. Is likely to be true. Okay, so again, I've said, particularly if you're watching this in my face-to-face class or my online synchronous class, like I told you, the world's a complicated place. I'm not making it complicated. The fact is that our use of the term argument, the way you and I normally use it just on a day-to-day basis, and even in many of our classes that we take in its colloquial form. We're not using in a strict sense. And even in a class, say like your English class, classes who are going to use the term in a fairly definitive way, still use it very differently from the way that philosophers and some of the more technical writing use the word arguments. So the word argument has a variety of uses. There's the colloquial use, there's, let's just call it the sort of English use, if you will. I'm generalizing. And then there's the full on technical philosophical use of the term argument, which is what we're dealing with in this class. An argument, then, as this definition tells us, is an attempt at trying to establish the truth of some claim using other claims as supporting evidence. I don't generally use the word evidence, but as evidence. An argument, in a sense, is a proof. And the word proof here doesn't mean what we normally take it to mean either. A proof in mathematics and in logic is a series of steps that demonstrates the either necessity or inductive probability of some other claim. Proof does not mean, if you say I've proved this, it doesn't mean it is in fact true. Particularly in mathematics or in science and in philosophy, it typically means something like is likely to be true to a high degree of probability. Or, as we're going to find out here in just a second, they could be necessary truths, but there's going to be a give and a take. I'm going to give you some examples here in a little bit, but let's just sort of continue here. Now, we're going to stick with that definition of argument. Let's just sort of highlight that here. This is going to be the main one that we're going to work with throughout the semester. You're reading it defines it slightly differently. That's okay. This is the definition I'm going to be using. It applies to what you read also. Okay. Now, we are going to distinguish between two different types of arguments. So we're going to have deductive arguments and inductive argument. All right. Let's actually take let's actually take inductive argument first. Let's talk about what an inductive argument is. And I'll give some definition to this here in a second. An inductive argument is a type of argument that relies on experience, notions of chance, likelihood. Ooh, horrible handwriting there. Sorry about that. Probability. Just as a way to characterize it. You use the process of induction on a daily basis. Any type of reasoning that involves, to use this loosely, predicting any reasoning that you use that is going to predict future events is inductive. Take, for example, just a few examples, right? So you're hungry, you go to the refrigerator, make a sandwich. You open up the mayonnaise jar, right? and you smell something funny. Someone with no experience of the world is going to have a higher likelihood of not realizing that that mayonnaise has gone bad than someone with some experience of the world. And by gone bad, we mean is in a state that is not fit for human consumption. Children, for example, have a hard time judging what food is good and what is bad. Not what their preference is, not what they like, but distinguishing between what's actually harmful and what's not, what's good food and what's bad food, or what was good and now has become bad, spoiled, rotten, that sort of thing. Now, obviously, our taste buds and so on help us, and sometimes even bad food with no experience, food that isn't bad for us. Sometimes our taste buds can indicate whether it's good or bad, but that errs more on the side of like what is pleasing to us rather than what's good or bad for us. A child doesn't necessarily know when mayonnaise has gone bad, for example, and so on. Buttermilk, for example, I'm not a fan myself, but buttermilk might seem bad to some people, but in fact is because it's kind of sour and it tastes sour and it's sort of thick and a little chunky, and um, some people find that very pleasant, and so that's not an indication of it going bad necessarily. So there's a level of complexity here, right? So, judging whether food is good or bad is an inductive process. It relies on experience, it relies on chance and likelihood. That mayonnaise might smell good, but it might actually be bad. Right? We're not 100% guaranteed that we're going to recognize whether something is good or bad. There's a chance, there's a likelihood. And the longer you're alive and the more you pay attention and know things about the world, the better you're going to be at judging things like that. That's inductive reasoning. If you're a driver, driving is mostly, by and large, an inductive process. You have to be able to judge what the person in front of you is going to do, right? If someone has their blinker on, there is no guarantee that they know their blinker is on or that they're going to abide by the rules of the blinker being on, even if they do know it's on. If a blinker isn't on, you still have to be able to anticipate if someone's going to try to get in front of you or do something else, just the myriad of things that drivers do. That's an inductive process, right? If the 13-year-old, takes the keys to mom and dad's car, never having driven before, only ever having been a passenger, gets the car and manages to find their way on the freeway or a busy street, or the 40-year-old who's been driving for 30, well, I guess it wouldn't be 34, let's say 20 years, um who would have a better chance at making it back home alive or and uninjured? The 40-year-old. Is there a guarantee? No, absolutely no guarantee. But what's more likely to happen? It is more likely that the 40-year-old is going to make it home alive, if for no other reason. Even the 40-year-old, let's just say a 40-year-old who's never driven before, who, like the 13-year-old, has only ever been a passenger, who's more likely to make it home? The 40-year-old. They're going to know more. They're going to understand, at least in principle, some of the principles of driving, and they're going to have better motor control. They're going to understand their bodies better, and they're going to have a better chance. They both might die, become injured. Neither might not make it home. It's just that if you're going to bet money on who's going to be home, who's going to come home safest, you're probably going to bet on the older person just because of experience. And that's what we mean. That's what an inductive. That's what inductive reasoning is. And actually, I meant to say, let's say reasoning, inductive reasoning. Got a little ahead of myself. Inductive reasoning. All right, now we can highlight this. Let's make this easier on myself here. All right. Inductive reasoning. I'm in the mode of argument, and so I was thinking about argument. Okay. Now, deductive reasoning is a little bit different. The characterization of deductive reasoning is necessity. Um, necessity. Uh, when we talk about deductive reasoning, we're talking about, to use some fancy words here, um, implication and entailment. Um, when we talk about deductive reasoning, we're talking about claims that don't rely on probability or chance or experience. We're talking about the guarantee um, the guarantee of truth, where in inductive reasoning we're talking about the likelihood of truth. Deductive reasoning guarantees truth, guarantees it. Inductive reasoning can only show the likelihood of truth. Okay, so let me try to give you a an example of each here. So if I said, um, you've probably heard things like this before, so I'm just going to use sort of a standard um, example for this stuff. Um, all human beings will die at some point. Um, the author of Game of Thrones. I don't know why that popped into my head. I've never actually even seen it. I've never read the books, but can't even remember his name all of a sudden. The author of Game of Thrones. Whoops, I don't know why I didn't mean to put that there. The author of Game of Thrones is a human being. So he will die at some point. Now, this is a very short paragraph that has 3 sentences to it, but let's have a look at it. Remember, an argument is a relationship between certain claims and other claims. There is a certain claim called a conclusion, which is supposed to be like the thing that is being established as true or likely to be true, and the other claims are doing the establishing. So let's use our little scheme here, and let's try to look at what this argument actually looks like by clearly identifying what is doing the supporting and what is being supported. So when we look at this, we ask ourselves, what is the main point of this? What is the main claim? What is the main claim and what is supporting what claim? Well, first, let's isolate all of the claims. And we're just going to rewrite it. In this sense, and I kind of did this on purpose, it's kind of easy. So let's do number 1. We're not thinking of order right now. We're just asking what the separate claims are. One claim is all I'm going to shorten a little bit. All human beings will die. The second claim is the author of Game of Thrones is human. And the third claim is the author of Game of Thrones will die. Those are the three main claims. What we've done is we've separated them, and we're being very clear about what the claims are. What is being claimed? Now, the second question is, what is the relationship between these? What is the main claim and what is being supported? Do we think number one is the main claim and 2 and 3 are doing the supporting? What do we mean by that? By support, what we're talking about is if the supporting premises, what you might call the evidence, right? If the supporting premises are true, would the conclusion be true? Or would it be likely to be true? That's that supporting relationship. And let's ask then, if we think 1 is the main claim, then are 2 and 3 doing the supporting? So let's think. Is it the case such that if it's true that the author of the Game of Thrones is human and the author of Game of Thrones will die, therefore it must be true that all humans will die? Right? Is it so? Is the truth that the author of the Game of Thrones is human and the truth that the author of Game of Thrones will die, does that establish the fact that all humans will die? And so let's put it in this format. 2 and 3, can we conclude 1? Is that the relationship that is being established here? Well, let's think of a counterexample. So a counterexample is an example that goes against, that counters, that shows that a certain claim is false. So just as an example, if I said, again, here's just a very famous example. If I said all swans were white, a counterexample would be a single one or more non-white swans. They could be brown, they could be black, they could be whatever. Right? If the claim is that all swans are white, all means all means no exception, then the counter to that is at least one swan that's not white. So if I said all humans will die, the counterexample will be one human, at least one human, who will not die. And I mean dead, like ceasing to exist. You know, their personality dies, their body dies and rots and decomposes and so on, right? That's what I mean. I mean actual death. So if we say all humans will die, a counterexample will be a single human, at least one human who will not die. Okay? So then, given the truth of 2 and 3, let's assume that 2 and 3 are actually true. It's true that the author of the Game of Thrones is human. It's true that the author of Game of Thrones will die. Does that mean necessarily that all humans will die? Right? So, let's do this by analogy. By analogy, let's say, well, actually I meant here. Let's do this here. The author of the Game of Thrones is one human being, a single human being, right? And a single human being who will die. Let's do the same thing here by analogy. Let's do this coin. Imagine just some coin. I found is silver. Sorry, 3. That's a 3. Actually, let me just erase it here. Be fair here. Hold on. Let me make it more analogous here. This coin. Let me erase this too. This coin I found. Is shiny. Fair enough. This coin I found will bend. Great. Then, to complete the analogy here, therefore, all shiny coins I find will bend. Right? So that clearly doesn't follow. There are some coins, and we know this from experience. So this is actually, in this version, this is an inductive argument. There are actually some coins that are shiny that you will find that will not bend. And I'm assuming here that I'm talking about like you being able to bend them, right? You could find a shiny metal coin made out of titanium, and they exist, right? And you're not going to be able to bend it, but it's going to be shiny, and you found it, and it's a coin, but you are not going to be able to bend it, right? We're talking here on planet Earth, on somewhere else in the universe. It might, circumstances might change. So by analogy, then, we realize that what you're doing by saying in this arrangement, the author of Game of Thrones is human, the author of Game of Thrones will die, you cannot conclude that therefore all human beings will die. There could be some human, given this argument and just this argument, nothing in that particular arrangement about 2, 3, therefore 1 follows that all humans will die. So then, let's switch it around. As it turns out, they're actually in order already. And so, since we know this, since we know this order doesn't follow, come on. Okay. Since we know this order doesn't follow, the order that it's in is actually the correct order. And so I'm just going to do this for sake of ease. Therefore, 3. And look at this relationship now. That's exactly this argument. Let's look at this relationship. Number 1 sets up a broad category. And it says, in other words, let's write it differently. Let's take this here and go here now. And it says, if something is a human, then it will die. The author of Game of Thrones is human. And you can see immediately, like just take these two right here, right? All humans will die. That means if something is a human, then it will die. That's a condition, right? That is a condition. The condition is that if something is human, then it will die. It doesn't say all things that die are human, right? It's a very specific relationship. If something is human, then it's going to die. It's another way of saying all humans will die. Okay? The author of Game of Thrones is a human. If it's true that all humans will die, that if something is a human, it's going to die, and if the author of Game of Thrones is a human, then it must be true that the author of Game of Thrones will die. Oh, sorry about that. I guess you probably can't see that. Let me. Well, I can't scroll over, so sorry about that. I wasn't paying attention. I just realized that my little thing is in the way here. I wasn't paying attention. I kind of was getting into what I was doing. I'm not paying attention. Anyway, but you can still sort of read it. So, what an argument does then, let's go back to our definition, is that it establishes a relationship between certain types of sentences. Oh, sorry, not certain types, but certain sentences. There is a claim, there is a thing that is to be believed, a thing that is to be known, the main contention, what we call the conclusion. And then there are sentences such that if they are true, then they support the truth of that other claim. And that's what our definition says here. And so when we look at our argument here, if these are true, then that has to be true. In other words, if these are true, this can't fail to be true. This must be true. There is no counterexample to this if these are true. And this is what we mean, in this case, by a deductive argument. So let me relabel this here. So this and this are two versions of the same argument. Two versions of a same argument. This is a conditional argument, and this is a categorical argument. Don't worry about it. You can look that up if you want, or we can talk about it. I'm not going to we're not going to go into a lot of detail about it. If this were a logic class, then we would absolutely go into detail about it. What you need to know is that these are different versions of the same argument. They establish the same thing, just doing it in a different way. And both of them are deductive because the conclusion is necessary. I'll use this because I have more space up here. We say that the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. Or another way of saying it is to say that in a deductive argument, the premises imply the conclusion. Two different ways of saying the same thing. Actually, another way of saying it is that a conclusion is entailed by its premises. Okay, and a deductive argument. In a deductive argument, the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. In a deductive argument, the premises implies the truth of the conclusion. All right. Let's add a page here and go on. Let's finally talk about let's look at actually let's sort of let's define let's define now before I go on. Let's define a deductive argument. I characterized it for you. I showed you an example, but let's go ahead and define it. So let's do definition, deductive argument. So we'll let this be our definition. So a deductive argument this is going to be similar to what I did before. But a little bit more specific. So a deductive argument is an argument whose truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion. And that rounds out our discussion of a deductive argument. Let's turn our attention now to inductive arguments. Let's just separate our space here. Okay. Let's go ahead and start off here with this isn't going to take as long. You'll get the idea. Let's go ahead and start off with a definition of an inductive argument. A deductive argument is an argument whose truth of the premises, so in both cases, we're assuming the premises to be true here, support the truth of the conclusion only to a degree of probability. So let's have an example here. So let's say, okay, let's just take a true story right now. So, God dang it. It's this pin. Sorry, there's a button on it that I keep pressing. I used to have tape over it so I wouldn't press it, but I took it off. I need to put it back on. It is cloudy outside. That's the case right now. I can look out the window and it's cloudy. What else? It is humid outside. It sprinkled. It sprinkled last night. This is all true. My weather app says it's going to rain later today. Let's just stop there. I could keep going. The you know, my friend across town said that it was raining in his part of town earlier today. The weather forecast on TV, the meteorologist said it was going to rain. I got a notification on my phone. I could go on and on and on, right? There's at least maybe 10 more premises that I could put here. So this is all true. This all actually happened. It's true right now. It's humid. It's cloudy outside. It sprinkled last night. My app says it's going to rain. What can I conclude? I can conclude that, I should say, can I conclude that it is going to rain? Can I conclude that it is going to rain? That doesn't seem right, does it? Because there have been plenty of times that it's been cloudy, it's been humid, that it's sprinkled the day previously, and that your weather app says it's going to rain and it doesn't. Not just where you're at, but even anywhere, right? Even though it says it, everything says it's going to, it doesn't. So we can't actually guarantee here. Let me do this. We can't actually guarantee that if those premises are true, the conclusion will be true. Let's say 1 through 4 are actually true, and they're actually true. Would you bet your entire life savings that it's going to rain? Would you bet everything? No, because your experience tells you that even though 1 through 4 are actually true, it still might not rain. There's no guarantee. How will you know? You'll know when it rains. But back here, I can guarantee that if 1 and 2 are true, then 3 must be true. Even if you don't know whether all humans will actually die or not, you don't even have to have experience of the world. All you need to know is what the sentence tells you. If it's true that all humans will die and the author of Game of Thrones is human, then it must be true that the author of Game of Thrones will die. Look at it another way. This is sometimes what students will have a problem with. Let's look at another deductive argument, but I'm going to make everything up. Let's say if flizables are blizables, or let's just stick to the categorical version here. It doesn't really matter. I just want to save space. All flizables are blizables. What's a flizable? No idea. What's a blizable? No idea. All flizables, but it doesn't matter. All flizables are blizables. That, or let's say this, doesn't really matter, but it sounds more grammatically correct. This flazibble is a blizable, therefore what? This flizzible is a flizable. What are flizzibles, blizables, and flizzables? Don't know. Doesn't matter. All that matters is that if it's true that all flizzables are blizables, and it's true that this flizzable is a blizzable, then all flizzables are a flizzable, or this flizzable is a flizzable. Right? Whatever those are, the conclusion must be true if the premises are true. Whereas in our deductive argument here, that's not our inductive argument, that's not the case. Even if 1 through 4 are actually true, and they are, you still can't guarantee the truth of the conclusion. But in both cases, let's go back to our definition of argument here, our second definition. In both cases, what you have is a connected series of sentences called premises whose truth attempt to support the truth of other sentences called conclusions. In both cases, you have this basic form where there is a thing, a conclusion that is supposed to be the main claim, the thing that we're supposed to believe in or is supposed to be true. And then there are sentences that support that truth to some degree, either of necessity or of likelihood. And that's what an argument is, right? That's what an argument is. Okay, so the idea then here is that you will take this, and this can help supplement your readings and anything else you do, and can help better inform you as to how we are going to be using the term argument in our class, in our readings, and so on. Arguments are very specific sorts of things. Arguments are a piece of reason. I generally like to say they're an object. They're an abstract object, but it's still an object. It is a piece of reasoning where there is a claim being made and there is support for that claim. Some types of arguments, the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. In other arguments, the conclusions don't follow necessarily, but are supported to a degree of likelihood. And we didn't talk about that here. I might address that in another video. But two different ways of reasoning. And one of the ideas that we have you do this and want you to think about this is because this is part of how we become better reasoners, better thinkers about things. Someone says this, we ask, okay, what's your reason? What reasons do you have that support that claim? And then it's our job, well, it's their job to provide those reasons, and it's our job to assess whether or not it's a good argument or a bad argument, whether or not the conclusion necessarily follows, or if it's highly likely to follow, or whether it doesn't. And of course, there's a lot that goes into that. We have to look up information and check information. Sometimes the authors of their claims don't want to give us the reason. Sometimes the reasons they give for their claims seem simple. And if you find yourself sort of nodding your head very easily, someone says, claims X and then gives you A, B, C, D for their reasons, and you're sitting here sort of nodding and so on. When you find people doing the reasoning for you and leading you on and you shaking your head, it's not to say that they're wrong, but it does mean that you've got some work to do. You need to actually go do something to see if what they're saying is actually true, if the arguments actually hold, if what they're even giving you is even an argument or not. Which again, I didn't address in this video. This is sort of strictly about just what an argument is, and maybe a little bit of how to spot it and so on. So the idea here again is that when you understand this stuff and you take it seriously, and it's not gonna happen necessarily after one class, right? But it's more of a lifelong kind of thing. You need to have the idea of an argument. You need to have the attitude that arguments matter to your reasoning. You need to have the attitude that you want to be a better decision maker, a better believer. You want to have um, beliefs that are that follow from conclusions. You want to have beliefs that are likely to be true rather than not likely. Even if we can't ever get at what actually is true, which is again another issue, at at least we can have reasoning that supports our beliefs in a deductive or an inductive way. But you have to be conscious and cognizant of those relationships, and that's what arguments are for. They help us in our analysis. As we go on, we're going to look at some arguments, and we're going to look at the relationships between the claims and the premises, the conclusions and the premises. um, uh, of course, keep doing your reading. This is supplement to the reading, and so on. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Um, Either through office hours, you can walk in, make an appointment with me virtually, or if during virtual office hours, or we can make an appointment for some other time that is more convenient for you. And as always, if a group of you, regardless of what class you're in, even online anytime, if you want to get together as a group and come to me and see if we can meet, I'm willing to do that as well. Even on a Saturday, I can't do it too often, but once or twice, I would be willing to meet for an hour or two, and we can schedule a time at some point. It's just an offer. You don't have to. Again, I can only do it so often. But if a number of you get together, then that's a signal to me that it's important, and of course, I'll take it seriously. Until then, uh, until next video, keep reading, and I will see you soon. Bye.